Well, hallelujah, my new microphone finally arrived, so let me know below if that's sounding better now, or if I still sound like I'm talking to you through two cans connected by a taut string. Apart from that, it's time for She-Hulk, Attorney at Law. And shocker, it's still terrible. This episode is the worst rated episode on IMDb. I watch the episodes ahead of time and give them a watch and genuinely try to enjoy them. Then I go back and rewatch and try and analyse the episode and make notes. So I watched this episode when it first came out. And this episode was the one that made me quit watching the series. So brace yourself, because according to IMDb users, this episode is notably worse than episode 1. And boy is that setting the bar low. So they do a recap at the start of the episode, and it's going to involve She-Hulk's blood, the Wrecking Crew, and Titania. So I went into how they ruined Titania last episode, and they've kind of ruined the Wrecking Crew as well. They made them into a joke. They also made Titania into a joke, and this removes any tension from your fight scenes. In some ways, the villain in a story, the antagonist, is more important, I think, to build for me than the protagonist is. Think to yourself, would Star Wars have worked if Darth Vader was a joke? Would it have worked if he was a clumsy, bumbling clown? And if he was those things, why would it be important for him to lose? It worked because he was imposing, ruthless, a killer, powerful with James Earl Jones' booming voice. In some ways, Luke was far less important to Star Wars than Vader was. It's a quite strange fact that the guy in the Vader suit was British, a guy called Dave Prowse. Now, Dave was an English actor, bodybuilder and weightlifter. He was quite a big lad, standing in at 6 foot 6 inches. That's 1.98 metres tall. So physically, Dave made a good Vader. Sadly for Dave though, he was born in Bristol and had quite a distinctive accent. It's the West Country accent, and it sounds a lot like Stephen Merchant, or a bit like the Hobbits from the Jackson Lord of the Rings, leading to footage like this before George Lucas added in James Earl Jones' voice later on.
Finding the right voice for Darth Vader was another challenge.
And action!
Lucas had never intended to use the on-set vocal performance of David Prowse.
Start tearing this ship apart piece by piece until you find those tapes. Find the passengers of this vessel. I want them alive!
So they go into the Marvel intro, and at this point, I'm just mostly looking at the faces of the characters that I liked that Marvel have badly screwed up, ruined or killed. It's like a highlight reel of disappointment. An archetype was set as far back as Iron Man 1, where Tony Stark was made a lot more wisecracking than he was in the source material. And now all of the characters do it, strangely, apart from Spider-Man, who was one of the characters from the comics who did the most wisecracks. And this, I think, is maybe where the superhero genre's gone wrong. I think Iron Man 1 was a good film that set some very bad precedents. All of the characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe seem to have drifted towards that version of Tony Stark over time, and have moved further away from the very different group of people that they were in the comics. So we start off, and Jen has been invited to a friend's wedding, and she doesn't even want to go to it. But she's going to go anyway, and I can't say I understand. She feels like she should, she says, and maybe this is a woman thing, I just don't get it. She-Hulk breaks the fourth wall again, and it's just annoying. It's like it's trying to be the sensational She-Hulk, and I'm not the most fond of it when it happens in that comic. This is an inferior copy of something I didn't really like in the first place. She-Hulk says, I know this wedding's happening at an inappropriate time in the series, but that's how it is in real life. But almost nothing has happened in the series for this wedding to get in the way of. And this just looks like the writers writing their complaints and neuroses about life into their work again. And no, this is in no way relatable to me. If I don't want to go somewhere, I just don't go. She-Hulk arrives at the wedding and gets out of the car, in a dress as She-Hulk, and this couldn't be more of an obvious power fantasy for the writers if they tried. This is less like watching an entertainment series at this point, and is more like watching someone's therapy session. Lots of people come up and start complimenting her. All the men want her, and all the women want to be her. The ego on the writers of this series is astonishing. I think I'm starting to understand the actions of the block-headed medic now. Is this what California is like? The projectionist writers think that they're amazing. So when they get rejected, they genuinely don't understand. When men don't like them, the men must be wrong. All of them. And even when a man leaves, in their heads, they still labour under the impression that the man leaving thinks that they're amazing. And they don't realise that the men are probably rejecting them because of the egocentricity. Being conceited is not a very attractive quality to most people, I think. It's not a fun trait to be around. It's not the sign of a good partner either. Because when someone always prioritises themselves and demands more of the other person, you're not their partner, you're their lackey. And never mind the idea of having kids with someone who only thinks about themselves. Kids need a lot of time and attention, and they're not going to get much of either from a parent who only thinks about themselves. The bride is unhappy at Jen for arriving as She-Hulk and taking all of the attention away from her, and that is why Jen did it. She pretty much admits to it. She turned up as She-Hulk just to show off and show up the bride. It's an old friend's wedding, and Jen is still only thinking of herself, of how she can make other people's wedding about her. Jen hasn't brought a date along with her, and she doesn't want to walk alone down the aisle, so she's given someone by the bride, someone called Jonathan, who's apparently great, or so Jen is told. In reality, Jonathan is a small crippled dog, and the bride and the bridesmaids just want to humiliate Jen. And is this what female friendship is like? Why would anyone be friends with any of these people? It reminds me of a line of Al Bundy's in Married with Children when he said, "Son, don't try to understand women. Women understand women and they hate each other."
Or something.
I
don't know what you're talking about. I'm a member of the Imperial Senate on a diplomatic mission.
You are part of the Rebel Alliance and a traitor. Take her away.
Could you make me a cup of tea, please, Stephanie?
She-Hulk, it's still awful. But on the upside, during this episode, Jen gets punched in the face while she's thrown up in a bush. And seeing as Jen is human, and she flew maybe 30 feet from that one punch to the face, she'd be dead. And if you're curious about how she survived that, I can't tell you. She'd be dead. The show's rubbish. I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you. You probably only came here to hear me suffer. It's She-Hulk time again. How can I make it fun this time? I was browsing for news related to the show and got some clickbait articles, and for a horrible moment, I actually thought Disney had greenlit a season 2 of She-Hulk. Honestly, I'm so fed up with Disney Marvel at this point. I've just not been watching a lot of the new stuff. Since Endgame, I've just been over it. I didn't watch Hawkeye. I didn't watch Falcon and the Winter Soldier, WandaVision, Doctor Strange 2, Black Widow, I Am Groot, Loki, Thor Love and Thunder. I only watched She-Hulk to review it. So what was going on in this episode? Well, Jen was at a wedding where everybody was awful. And Jen had just learned that the date that her friends had set her up with was a crippled dog. Meanwhile, at Jen's law office, Mallory and Nikki are having to fill in for Jen. They have a client called Mr. Immortal, and he's in legal trouble. He's been married multiple times, I think they say 8 times, and he has superpowers. He can't die, so when he gets bored, he fakes his death and moves on from the marriage. He kills himself so he doesn't have to ask for a divorce, and the problem is, his ex-spouses have caught up with him. And I'm not sure what I'm supposed to think of what happens in this scene. The two women get irate and start talking and talking over each other. They lose any kind of professionalism, and he gets so upset he throws himself out of her office window. And I'm not sure who the butt of this joke is supposed to be. The man for evading the confrontation, the women for being so awful that he'd rather throw himself out of a window than talk to them, or me for watching this inane rubbish. And this raises a tricky ethical question that is frankly more interesting than talking about this show, so I'm going to talk about that instead briefly. Is it more ethical to fake your death instead of getting divorced? And I don't know. I could envisage times when maybe it would be. It could maybe cause less trauma to the partner if they think you're dead instead of rejecting them. It could leave them financially better off without the cost of a divorce. It's ethically non-trivial. As it is, Mr. Immortal left many of the partners with credit card debts or raising children alone. So no, once kids are in the equation, that changes it. The lawyers seem to repeatedly breach ethical codes and seem happy at their own client's distress because they don't like him. And Nikki arranges what everyone will get from Mr. Immortal after the divorce after extensive bickering. Jen gets seen at the wedding by the bride who wants to talk to her. She asks Jen how she is, and Jen tells her that she has superpowers now and a new job, a lot's changed. Neither of which she actually earned, but the friend instead wants to know if Jen has a man, and she seems to be trying to run Jen down and bring up things that she knows will upset her. And if I was Jen, this maybe would have been the time I left the wedding. But instead Jen stays, and Titania arrives at the wedding. Jen says Titania has weaseled her way into this wedding just to mess with her, and why does nobody else see that? Maybe, Jen, because Titania has just arrived and nobody's said anything about it yet, and they probably think you're crazy because you're acting crazy. Titania says not everything is about you, Jennifer, and that much should be true, but it isn't. They're going to demonstrate the opposite in this episode. It turns out everything that happens is about Jen. This is how the writers seem to see the world. The writers genuinely seem to think that everything is about them. Ordinarily, I'd probably not even bring up the writers, but they seemingly insert themselves constantly into the story. Jen goes outside and gets approached by a guy called Josh, who seems to be flirting with her. Mid-conversation, the bride comes up to them and asks Jen to clean up her wedding for her, clean up glasses and such, as the bride has been abusing the waitstaff and they've left. And this again would be a good time for Jen to leave the wedding. Jen puts on her bridesmaid's dress and joins the other bridesmaids, but she's told that the groomsmen have wrinkled their shirts and the other bridesmaids expect her to be the one to iron them. This is also where Jen is shown that she'll be walking down the aisle with a dog, and this again would be a good time to leave and give the bride both barrels on the way out. Why would you want to be friends with this person or have her in your life at all? She's thoroughly poisonous. Jen instead gets drunk and dances badly to Annie Lennox. Drunk Jen is approached by Josh again, and she says to him, "Everyone is saying how She-Hulk is amazing, and I just want it to be amazing tonight." And Jen is fishing for compliments. He says he thinks she's pretty great, and she goes to throw up in a flower bed. While she's throwing up, Titania approaches her and punches her in the face, sending her flying. And she'd be dead. She went flying maybe 30 feet from a single punch to the face. As Jen, she's human, and that would have crushed her skull. Jen asks Titania why she's obsessed with her, and Titania says, "I said it wasn't over, and I'm not obsessed with you, but it seems everyone else here is." Jen turns into She-Hulk and they have a fight. Titania wants payback for the court case a few episodes ago, and the CGI as She-Hulk jumps is horrible again. Jen also wrecks the wedding venue. Titania, it seems, only came to the wedding to mess with Jen, and the fight scene is terrible. Neither of the people in the fight seem to have any fight training whatsoever, whereas the characters they're playing are supposed to be expert brawlers, and by turning into She-Hulk, Jen has also broken her word to the bride. Neither of them can even throw a convincing punch. She-Hulk's dress also appears to be the wrong size. Tatiana Maslany is 5'4" tall. She-Hulk is 6'7". None of this works at all. Why does the dress still fit She-Hulk? Was that dress from the superhero tailor too? Titania's tooth veneers fall out after she trips on some ice and falls face first during the fight. But they didn't somehow come out when she was getting hit in the face by She-Hulk. And the bride comes in drunk and doesn't mind that the venue's been wrecked. She's just happy She-Hulk's at her wedding. In reality, it would probably mean a lawsuit and maybe criminal charges for destroying the wedding venue. She ripped up the patio.
Senate on a diplomatic...
You are part of the Rebel Alliance and a traitor. Take her away.
She-Hulk. Nope, it's still terrible. So we're at the stage with Disney, where everything they put out has an agenda, be it feminism, environmentalism, LGBT rights, and the brand of feminism that they're going with seems to mostly just involve hating men. And the main agenda, the one that should be there, providing entertainment in exchange for money, is nowhere to be seen. I'm now half a dozen programmes into this comedy show and it's yet to get even one laugh from me. Not even one. And this show is still desperately unfunny. The series seems to be very loosely based on a mixture of two runs of the She-Hulk comics, the Savage She-Hulk and the Sensational She-Hulk, and it's way worse than either of them. They butcher pretty much every character and don't even manage to copy some of the parts of the comics that actually were quite funny. Like this, from the Sensational She-Hulk, which is a lot more humorous than the 1980 run was. It has a lot more jokes and fourth wall breaking, and this is where the TV She-Hulk gets the meta humour from. In this edition, She-Hulk is trying to halt a large runaway truck in order to protect civilians, and that's more heroism than TV She-Hulk has managed so far in 3 hours. So She-Hulk tries to block off the truck, and this happens. It's pretty basic slapstick, but it still gets to show She-Hulk as being heroic. It just doesn't work out for her. Meanwhile, in the TV show, we're at the law office, and Nikki had stumbled upon a website during the meeting with Mr. Immortal, a website called Intelligentsia. And it is this website that let Mr. Immortal's exes know about his continued existence. I think it's the writers trying to have a go at 4chan or something, and it's psychologically captivating. Don't get me wrong, the actual show is dull beyond belief. The interesting part is watching the writers project their neuroses onto the screen and try to dismiss arguments out of hand without ever listening to them. Nikki saw a reference in the sidebar of the Intelligentsia website saying slutty She-Hulk and really wanted to get into the website. She wants it to a frankly obsessive degree and sends emails out pretending to be a misogynist to site members in order to get in. And by the time she gets in, it's gone dark in the office. Also note that Nikki is wearing a pentagram. Make of that what you will. They introduce Intelligentsia, describing them as man-babies, all while themselves being incredibly childish. The whole Intelligentsia thing is more of the writers being wildly obnoxious. And they've already started with fallacious thinking. They introduced Intelligentsia by poisoning the well. Let's see what these caricatures had to say. Wants equality, still expects you to pay for dinner. I know, right? The gall of men to expect equality. Don't men know that equality's only for women? Because that's what the writers were offended at. That a man is calling them out for not wanting equality when it suits them. Nothing could be more equal than going on a date and splitting the bill 50-50, or both people paying for themselves. It's like that adage, when you're accustomed to privilege, equality feels like oppression. And that's what this is. They have a privilege and are offended that they're only being offered equality. Why do you think you're entitled to have men buy your dinner for you and subsidise your lifestyle? And yes, it's a pretty clear breach of the concept of equality. It's instead special pleading. It's saying, I deserve equality, and I deserve more. And it is, if anything, insulting to the man unlucky enough to be with you. It's like saying you're more interested in his wallet than you are in him. And if you believe in equality, maybe you should treat the men in your life once in a while if you expect them to do it for you. There's nothing wrong with going Dutch. If anything, it seems to be a healthier way to start a relationship. If the man pays for everything, it's starting the relationship on a grounding that the man provides and the woman takes. So what happens to the relationship if the man gets sick? Because if that happens, a lot of men get cast aside because they can no longer provide. It's not good for a relationship if one partner only knows how to take. And a woman expecting the man to pay for everything is a pretty big red flag that she doesn't respect or value him. The next one. Wears yoga pants, gets mad when you look. And boy, is this one a can of worms. Is it reasonable to look at other people? Well, yes. I look at everything around me. It's basic situational awareness and threat detection. And people's eyes are naturally drawn to movement. I'm not going to stop doing that. Is it reasonable to get mad at somebody for looking at you? No, not really. If it's a glance, staring is maybe a different story. Staring at people is maybe going to get you into a situation you don't like. But if someone is staring and making you uncomfortable, it's maybe not unreasonable to ask them to stop. And if it happens, maybe don't jump to the worst possible conclusions. It's not always like you think it is. Like the recent story of the blind male gym user who got an earful for staring at a woman in inverted commas. This is kind of getting ridiculous. And meanwhile, women get to look where they want and nobody says a thing. I'll just add that to the ever-growing pile of double standards created by people who want special treatment, not equality. As for yoga pants, man or woman, it's maybe not a good idea to wear something so tight and thin that people can see the shape of your genitals through it. As a man, I tend to wear things that don't allow people to know if I've been circumcised or not. And similarly, if you walk around with half of your breasts hanging out, people are probably going to notice that there's a strange woman in the room with half of her breasts hanging out. Someone may see you and say, "Excuse me, ma'am, but this is a daycare." Point being, people are going to see you, and if you're going to be angry at people seeing you in clothes that you chose to wear, maybe you should have chosen to wear something else. I thought about this for a while. Where do I stand on people staring at women or at anyone and making them uncomfortable? I already make a lot of concessions to other people's comfort. I tend not to stare. If it's late at night, I'll cross the road so as not to get too close and scare people. I'm not a small guy, and it has been known for people to find me scary. If something I do is making someone uncomfortable and they ask me nicely not to, I'll weigh that up and maybe change what I'm doing. But I will not be given orders about where and where not I can direct my own eyes. Skip me with that. At times, it can be hard not to look at someone too much. I remember a girl from university who I found just so crushingly beautiful that I could barely take my eyes off her. It's only been that bad once, I think, where it felt like my eyes were magnetically attracted to someone. In my defence, she looked and acted like an angel. I wasn't thinking anything bad. I was just kind of in awe. The thinking part of my brain would switch off for a moment, and when it came back on, I'd be looking at her and sighing, and it was kind of embarrassing. I was actively trying to stop so I wouldn't make her uncomfortable, and I was not doing a very good job of it. But people noticing your existence does not mean that they want you or are ogling you. They may be thinking that you look ridiculous. They may think that you look like a tramp. But look who I'm trying to talk sense to. These are people that think when a man leaves and doesn't ever call again, it's a sign of how awesome he thinks you are. So sorry, ladies. Occasionally I may have to look in your direction, if just because I'm trying not to walk into people. I can scarcely believe this needs saying, but I control my eyes, not you. And you don't get to control my bodily autonomy, even if you'd like to. And it doesn't matter how much you nag. The level of entitlement required that you think you have a right to tell someone else what they can look at. Wow, and some of you writers are struggling to find partners. Shocking. You seem like such a catch. You want special treatment from men and want it to be treated as normal. You want special treatment and to be able to act like you're entitled to it. And no, I'm not going to let someone try to manipulate and shame me into being their toady. You aren't a princess, you aren't a queen, and I'm not your footman. I'm not going to be henpecked, lectured and shamed into spending my life on my knees, blindfolded, serving you, even if that would make you more comfortable. Get over yourself. I think a quote from Hillary Clinton best sums up the attitude that we're witnessing here. Women have always been the primary victims of war. Women lose their husbands, their fathers, their sons in combat. And I think I would like to amusingly paraphrase that as men dead, women most affected. And after that, there are loads of people who want Jen dead. And why? She never does anything. She was in the news once for saving a jury, and that's it, isn't it? What else has she done? She helped Wong with some demons, got into a fight at a wedding, won a court case, went speed dating. Why would anyone care enough to want her dead? So throughout this section, they strawmanned arguments from people that they don't like, but they don't actually disprove the arguments and beat the strawmen. If anything, they lost to the strawmen of their own creation. Mallory tells Nikki not to tell Jen about the threats on the website because it will upset her and ruin her mental health. So Nikki gets in the car and immediately phones Jen and tells her, because Nikki is a tool. And this is what they do instead of either Nikki or Mallory doing the sensible thing and calling the police. They have evidence of threats and conspiracy to commit murder. It's also a good idea to tell Jen so she at least knows a threat is there and can defend herself. But Nikki's not telling Jen because it's in Jen's interests. Nikki is telling Jen because Nikki can't shut up even if it hurts her friend. There is not a single nice character in this show. I'm hard pressed to decide who I like the least. Meanwhile, Jen is getting on well with Josh. He appears to have met her threshold for bedroom time by buying her some fries, so he's well in there. And yes, that episode was effing diabolical again. I hope you enjoyed this review, because I had to watch this episode twice, and at least some good will have come of my pain.
Could you make me a cup of tea, please, Stephanie?